Good afternoon, everybody. Guess where I'm giving this wonderful lecture from, in case you can't tell? Sitting in the middle of a car. Whoops, that's okay. So, today we're going to talk about some of the ways that social psychology might come into play in a legal setting or in a courtroom. So we'll talk, eyewitness testimony, get a handle on what that is. Then we're going to talk about the fallibility or maybe reliability or lack of eyewitness testimony. And then we'll talk about other social factors that might influence juries and the decisions that they make. So we'll start here. If you want to end an argument, all you got to say is, I saw it with my own eyes. I remember when my son was somewhere around 7. And mean daddy, what I had to do was I decided it was time I had to confront my son, tell him about Santa Claus. All right? So I'm explaining to my son about this whole Santa Claus isn't real kind of a thing. Now he's getting upset. And now it's right around St. Patrick's Day. And so I decided, hey, whatever, I'm in this conversation about Santa Claus isn't real. I might as well get into the whole leprechauns aren't real too thing, right? Oh my goodness, my son was just like, he was flabbergasted. He just did not want to accept the idea that Santa wasn't real. So he thought he could, back up his argument. So he says, I saw a leprechaun in my classroom the other day. It ran behind the cupboard. Case closed. So in the eyes of a 7-year-old, he already knew I saw it with my own eyes was a very logical way to conclude an argument, to make a point. And it really is. It does work. Eyewitness testimony can be considered so much better than circumstantial evidence. Even if the witness is, that 2400 vision and wasn't wearing glasses, all right? You discredit the witness and everything. And still, eyewitness testimony is very convincing to a jury. So, possible outcomes of eyewitness testimony. Eyewitness testimony can be valid or invalid, correct or incorrect, basically. And so what happens is it can be valid because the eyewitness witnessed the event and tells the truth and everything comes out the way it should be. It can be valid because the witness didn't actually see the event but used circumstantial evidence but got to the right conclusion anyway, right? Not the way we want justice to be done. Or it can be invalid. Invalid eyewitness testimony can come from lying, people just blatantly lying, or a vendetta, you pissed me off earlier, so I'm going to pay back. Or maybe people are threatened, makes me think of the El Chapo trial that just came out, where El Chapo himself says, I will not threaten any of the witnesses, or, whatever. Maybe, he was convicted anyway. But unfortunately, one of the biggest problems with invalid eyewitness testimony is people that absolutely and utterly think they're correct, but they are in fact wrong. Okay, so we can talk about this as a memory storage system, but this is social psychology class. And so what we want to probably point out is that certain factors, social factors that lead to influence, such as confidence, expertise. Remember all of these things, these elements of persuasion that we talked about earlier, or who makes a persuasive communicator, can be true here in a court of law. A persuasive witness is one who is, and go back to that material and find it. We find eyewitness testimony in some flavor or shape or another shows up in almost every law system in the world. And to the degree that the Ten Commandments from Christianity, the Ten Commandments forms the basis of, religious law, right there at number 9, it points out, thou shalt not bear false witness, which is a way of saying we as a society cannot function if we do not take witness testimony to, in fact, be a valid thing. We find the U.S. Constitution has multiple points in here. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses, right? So witness testimony is big. You can't even get convicted unless you have. Or here, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, right? So all of a sudden, it's just really quite a powerful idea that witnesses and witness testimony have shown up over and over and over in our legal systems throughout history. So here's the very famous crime of the century. It was the original one. Okay? And 1920. So Mrs. Annie Nichols saw two men leaning on a fence. Two more men appeared, a factory, a cashier, and a bodyguard. One of the men that was on the fence shot the guard and the cashier. The car came up and the two men ran and got in. Okay, so what happens? There was multiple witnesses, and nobody could give a good description of the criminals. Nobody. One's like, oh, the guy was awful dark. One was really light, like a Finn or a Swede. One says, I think the driver had a mustache. Another says, no, I think he was clean shaven. But what was clear was that the pistol that was used was firing 32 caliber bullets. Okay, so you've got some forensics here. So now, what happens? Nicola Sacco, a shoemaker, and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. I got a little Italian in me. Oh, all right. A fish seller. Right? They were arrested, but neither had criminal records. Now, there is some evidence that, yeah, okay, there's, you got to kind of get this historical background. Number one, these guys were somewhat agitators. They were, if memory serves, they were actively in the socialist movement, and they were both Italian, and at this point in history, Italian immigrants were not seen in a particularly positive light. Okay, so the Italians by themselves was not a good thing, etc. And they both were armed, and Sacco had that 32 caliber not a 32 caliber automatic pistol. Okay, so now witnesses were brought into the jail. Okay, remember, they could not identify. No witness could identify anybody. So the witnesses were brought to the jail and say, hey, were these the guys? Were these the two guys that did it? And so now all of a sudden, at trial, all five said Sacco did it. He did it. He's one of the guys that did it. Now, not only did people say they couldn't, but here's one witness had previously said, I was so limited, there's no way I could possibly, but comes in and says, this is a guy. One had told policemen, I never even saw the faces of the robbers, but at trial, here he is. Another had said he didn't see enough. Another fourth said, they had all told other people they couldn't possibly do it, and yet they get to the trial and they're like, yep, that's exactly who it was. Now, Vanzetti, he was accused of another problem, a holdup from the previous year. And at this other crime, a witness had twice said to the police, there's just no way I could identify the perpetrator. They take him in, they show him Vanzetti, and then all of a sudden, guess what? The witness goes to trial and does this detailed description of what Vanzetti looked like, or, you know, the perpetrator. And so all of a sudden, poor Vanzetti, he's sitting here on guilty, and he's got a 12 to 15-year sentence put on his head, and now he's brought back for this other trial. Okay? So, now, you've got a bunch of witnesses, and none of which could identify, none of which could until they were shown Sacco and Vanzetti personally in jail. Now, both Sacco and Vanzetti had alibis for the day of the factory murders. Okay, Sacco had gone to Boston to the Italian consulate to get a passport, and the clerk remembers him really well because it was so silly. He's trying to get a passport, and he brings in a great big giant family photo, and is like, can I put this in my passport? And it's like, no, you can't put that in your passport, right? So it really stuck out. Vanzetti was selling fish in a different town, and there was a merchant there that said, yeah, I remember selling the guy some cloth. Okay, so both Sacco and Vanzetti have alibis. All right. Well, what happens is the jury believed the eyewitness memory over the alibi witness memory, because that's really what it comes down to. Which one? And they were both sentenced to death. And so at his trial, at the time of his death, he says, nice quote, I wish to tell you that I'm an innocent man. I never committed any crime, but sometimes some sin. I wish to forgive some people for what they are doing to me now. All right. So now we don't know for sure if this was a case of, a bad trial, but boy, we think it might be. It really feels that way. It really does. And so it's like, why was the eyewitness memory considered to be more pertinent than the alibi witness testimony? Okay, so flash forward another 50 years, and you've got the Sawyer brothers. Okay. What's the crime? Kidnapping a store manager at gunpoint. The manager was forced into a car and two kidnappers pulled masks over their faces. The manager says, I don't know, one looked Hispanic. One looked like somebody that recently applied at the store. And then they drive off in a 1965 Dodge Dart. So now Sandy and Lonnie Sawyer are pulled over in a 65 white Plymouth Valiant. Now, Dodge Dart and the Plymouth Valiant had some, they were similar. I'll give it that much. But neither Sandy or Lonnie Sawyer looked anything like the composite sketches, and neither one had applied for a job, okay? So there's nothing there. But all of a sudden at the trial, the store manager was like, these are the guys. But it didn't match what he had done in his sketch, they weren't Hispanic, and all of a sudden 4 alibi witnesses said, no, Sandy was at home, all right? The time of those kidnappings, he was with us at his home, all right? 4 alibi witnesses said Lonnie was over here. He was visiting his girlfriend at a printing plant, all right? She was working there. So there it is. And so what do you got? Jury deadlocks at 9-3. The judge instructs them, try very hard to become unanimous. And so a few minutes later, 12 come out voting guilty. Wow, the group pressure going on there, huh? Woo! And so what do we have here? On top of this, there's a rumor that Robert Thomas claims he was a kidnapper. Robert Thomas was in jail, and a private investigator talks to the store manager, and all of a sudden finds, say for example, you know what the defense was never given was a composite sketch of the kidnapper and the statement that the kidnapper looked like a recent job applicant. So these 2 pieces of information, which are quite critical, were not given to the defense team. So they looked it up, and guess what they found? Robert Thomas had, in fact, applied for a job 1 week before the kidnapping. Okay? Wow, here comes justice. So, despite all of this, the judge says, you know what? Sorry, can't have a new trial. There's been too much time since since you finished. Robert Thomas confesses in writing, on camera, recants the recantation, and still, they're sitting in jail. Eventually, they were pardoned, but why would such a travesty of justice occur? And so here is an interesting question. On the one hand, eyewitness testimony is very believable and we'll consider. You guys look at it. But here's a question. Is how come, and this is actually, I believe, on your exam. I don't quote me on that, but I think it is. It's like, so why, in both of these cases, was the eyewitness testimony held to such a higher regard than the alibi witness? And, what can I say? Chances are all of Sacco and Vanzetti's alibi witnesses were also Italian, right? So we should discredit them because we don't like Italians and we happen to be racist against Italians at this point in history? I don't know. How about Sandy and Lonnie Sawyer? This seems even worse to me because it appears as though the only witness that the prosecution had was the store manager. So you've got 1 store manager and 4 witnesses for Lonnie and 4 witnesses for Donnie Sawyer? I forgot his name. Anyway, the other Sawyer brother. They've got 8 witnesses. How does 1 beat 8? Okay? And I mean, when you think about it, again now, if Lonnie's girlfriend is working at a printing plant, chances are Lonnie Sawyer is not, in fact, a higher class. He's not, in the upper classes. He's not a rich kid. Now, I don't know Sandy and Lonnie. See, I knew I'd get it. Sandy and Lonnie, I don't know these guys. But, again, the very fact that they have the girlfriend working at the printing plant tells me something. Well, how about the 4 friends that are sitting at home with one of those boys? It's like, you know what? If friends won't lie for you, then what kind of friends are they, right? And so all of a sudden, can you really discount the testimony of people because they're perhaps poor or because they are in fact friends? Well, I don't know. I mean, I can see some legitimacy to this. So here's a true story. This is clearly less dramatic, but it's a true story anyway. One time I was in New York, living in New York, and it was crazy. I was just sitting at a Burger King looking to get onto the highway. And it's really weird in New York because you go from a dead stop on a stop sign or something onto a 60-mile highway, 60-mile-an-hour highway. It's just, there's no merge, there's no, you're just on. And so I'm sitting here driving a Geo Metro. If anybody knows a Geo Metro, stop laughing now. It's a tiny little 3-cylinder car. You really got to kick that thing in this. You got to hit the accelerator to the floor to even come close. So the point being, I needed a major break in the traffic to get this car in there. And so the truck behind me, this huge truck, it was just, oh my God, it was like a $400 truck with $25,000 worth of crap on it, right? And it was got the lift kit, and the thing is, the bumper of this car is as high as the back of my little Metro. Anyway, this guy just, boom, just plowed into me at a stop sign. I'm just literally stopped. And so now all of a sudden, genius, the guy's lives in his parents' basement and he's like 35. And I'm like, winner. So whatever. Don't be that dude. So anyway, what happens is, later on the police come and I'm like trying to tell I'm trying to tell the story a little bit. And they say, no, 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 sir, sorry. You're not allowed to give any type of testimony here. I said, well, what? No, only your wife can give testimony. What are you talking about? Or no, I mean, rephrase that. My wife couldn't give testimony. I could. I was a driver. Oh, what was I thinking? But my wife, by the way, and this is a shit, she ended up in the hospital because she was pregnant and it put her into early labor. Big deal. But anyway, what happens is they say, no, your wife can't give her side of the story at all. I was like, what? Why? And this is the way they explained it. If it's your wife and she doesn't lie for you, that doesn't make a very good wife. Okay, so how can your spouse be considered valid testimony or witnessing? Because you know for a fact that's what a spouse is supposed to. I'm sorry, you're supposed to support your spouse, okay? Marital problems abound if you don't. And so, I mean, there's a truth to that. So, in other words, this is a crap. Imagine this scenario, and again, this is hypothetical, but the guy behind me, he's got his girlfriend in the truck, and they're about to go to get married in 5 minutes, right? But they're not actually married, okay? Now all of a sudden, I can imagine the guy going, the car backed into my truck. I can imagine somebody saying that, and then some girlfriend going, yeah, that's what happened. And all of a sudden, it would be like, oh, shit, I'm completely out of luck. And so how is it possible that somebody that is 5 minutes from being married does count, but a spouse does not? And I can understand the legitimacy of saying a spouse does not. And so in the same way that I can understand why you might discredit a spouse's testimony, I don't know if it's legitimate to take the next logical step and say, well, of course your best friends are going to, lie for you. And it's a scary business that the alibi witness memory of eight people was dismissed. Why? Because a store manager is a fine, upstanding citizen of higher class? I don't know, but I'll bet you there's something to it. Okay? All right, so we'll talk about the reliability of eyewitness testimony next.